argument right now that Caitlin Clark has become the Taylor Swift for all of women's sports.
Seeing logo threes and buzzer beaters. Now, you know, Caitlin Clark has been the talk of the town for the past.
A $40 shirt cracked open a blind spot in the sports world that Nike could no longer cover up. Right at midnight, the drop went live, and within seconds, demand didn't just rise, it smashed straight through the system. This was the same setup built to handle global sneaker drops and massive campaigns, yet it suddenly looked shaky when faced with something Nike didn't fully expect.
Easy to see why Caitlin Clark was the one chosen to have the shoe deal.
A women's basketball fan base moving like a worldwide wave. That's what made it hit so hard. This wasn't driven by ads or controversy. It was raw momentum, the kind you can't fake or script. Millions showed up at the same moment, not because they were pushed, but because they felt history forming and wanted proof they were there for it. And that's where the real story actually begins. This demand didn't come out of thin air. It was built over months of silence, months of fans asking the same question and getting nothing back. Caitlin Clark had already become the gravitational pull, dragging casual viewers into the sport and turning normal games into must-watch moments.
I'm not gonna lie, I think we're looking at Caitlin Clark's ad being one of the more viral things we've seen in a long time. Like if you look at the Instagram post on Nike, as far as I'm aware, the Instagram post has like 30 million views, which is, again, absolutely bonkers. Which is bonkers. It is bonkers to see that many posts, that many things from obviously Nike.
She stacked points, stretched defenses with deep shots, and carried herself like someone who knew the spotlight was hers. Nike, a brand known for reacting fast when it senses a star, moved like it didn't realize what it was holding. That hesitation turned everything into a pressure cooker. By the time the merch finally appeared, this wasn't just a product launch anymore. It was a stress test. Could the industry treat women's basketball demand as real demand, not a side category? The servers didn't just crash. A long-running misread blew up in public, live.
Shoe is released, it's going to be an atom bomb in terms of sales. It's going to be an atom bomb in terms of celebrities and athletes wearing them on the court. We've already seen that her CC colorways of the Kobe's are the most popular colorways that are being worn on WNBA and NBA courts right now. This is only the beginning. Once Caitlin's shoe comes out, it is going to be
When the new logo finally showed up online, there was no hype rollout or dramatic countdown. The design was quiet but sharp. Two clean shapes locked together. Impossible to forget once you saw them. Late September, right at midnight, the listing appeared. $40 for adults, $35 for kids. Simple, accessible, and instantly recognizable. Nike stocked what looked like a safe number. 2 million units in a boardroom. That probably sounded bold. In reality, it was built on outdated ideas about women's basketball demand. The internet corrected that thinking instantly. The surge didn't build slowly. It slammed in all at once. Refresh after refresh. Carts loading, payments freezing, screens locking up. Nike's online engine, the same system trusted with the world's biggest launches, started timing out. In under a minute.
Gonna be a monster. It is going to be the most popular and the most important shoe that Nike has released, definitely since the LeBron shoe, and maybe even dating all the way back to the Jordan shoe.
Hype turned into confusion, then frustration. As the system buckled hard, orders still slipped through. Hundreds of thousands made it from cart to confirmation before the lockout hit. And that's when the energy flipped. Fans who didn't get in didn't leave. They regrouped, refreshed, posted screenshots, error pages, countdown timers. The shirt stopped being merch. It became proof. Proof of access, proof of timing, proof you were part of the moment. What made this historic wasn't just the volume, it was who caused it. A WNBA player, still early in her pro career, triggered buying behavior usually reserved for the biggest names in men's sports.
Just because, you know, she's the best female college player of all time that's coming out of college type shit. Even though they lost in the championship, they are still just showing this girl's face. No hate, no love. I really like her game. I haven't seen too much of it. I've seen little clips and stuff, but I really haven't.
Not through a manufactured push, but through momentum that had already spilled beyond the league's usual crowd. Nike didn't build the storm. It got caught standing in it. And it didn't stop in the US. As time zones rolled forward, the same error screens popped up worldwide. Europe hit pages that wouldn't load. In Asia, where her name already held real pull, the rush exploded just as hard. Fans lined up at physical stores like it was a limited drop, hoping shelves could deliver where the website failed. Supply couldn't keep up with interest. Then a second economy popped up.
Or just sat there and like watch her full highlight clips, just whatever like great shot she shoots or whatever play she makes that's big, and it goes on Twitter or TikTok, whatever. I've seen it, but I want to give respect due to this, to her, because again, what she's doing is amazing. Like you ain't never seen no female do what she be doing, or no woman. So in that standpoint, I just want to show love and just see, what's going on, like see what type of shots and like just the craftiness that she got.
Resale listings appeared almost instantly, not from Nike, but from the few who slipped through. The shirt wasn't priced like fan gear anymore. It moved like a collectible, sometimes climbing into the thousands. This was the signal that none of this was normal merch demand. This was international scarcity getting monetized in real time. That's when chaos flipped into leverage. Automated buying tools and full-time resellers moved fast, just like they always do when something turns into a status item.
To get your hands on the Caitlin Clark version of Nike's Kobe Bryant sneaker, you're out of luck. They are out of stock. The WNBA star teamed up with Nike for a player edition of the Kobe 5 Pro Tro, decked out in Indiana Fever colors. You see them on your screen. They dropped at 10 a.m. Monday, and they sold out before 11.
Bulk grabs, instant reposts, wild markups that made the original price feel meaningless within hours. The conversation changed fast. It wasn't about who got one anymore. It was about who could afford one. The site crash didn't kill the market. It rerouted the money. Nike's biggest mistake wasn't the tech failure. It was leaving a vacuum so massive that everyone else rushed in to profit. Every inflated listing, every flipped sale, every screenshot of a ridiculous asking price screamed the same thing. The moment had been badly underestimated. What should have been revenue captured at the source got drained into secondary markets across multiple countries. Even investors clocked it. This wasn't just about a shirt selling out.
Argument right now that Caitlin Clark has become the Taylor Swift for all of women's sports. She's easily recognizable in everything she does, and it's turning new generations of fans to her. It's bringing new generations of women and men to sports that maybe they weren't covering before. It's getting a level of interest that is far beyond the game that's being played. We can continue to debate the career process for Caitlin Clark and what's going to happen. But what this shoe deal proves to all of us and reminds all of us is that there are sometimes some people are larger than any one particular game that they play. Caitlin Clark has accomplished that already.
It was about a women's basketball star, triggering a measurable economic event. The kind that forces executives to rethink supply forecasts, demand models, and who they treat like a priority. This wasn't novelty hype. This was global demand that had already outgrown the old assumptions. Once checkout pages started failing, the internet did what it always does. It turned the drop into a live event. Clips of frozen screens, error messages, endless refresh loops, shared like a playoff game across every platform within hours.
Conversation around greatness can have nothing to do with the conversation around being a cultural phenomenon. And now there is no debate that Caitlin Clark has become exactly that. Think about it. The Nike historic shoe deal she just signed, she signed because companies like to make money, and they know they will make money. Because when Caitlin Clark walks into a coffee shop in the middle of nowhere, people recognize her. Because when you are on Saturday Night Live and every news and entertainment network along the way, not just sports networks, you've risen above the conversation about your play and you've become a cultural.
This wasn't just retail anymore. It became a shared experience. Hashtags climbed, reaction videos stacked up. The shirt turned into a joke, a flex, and a mission all at once. That's when it stopped acting like sports merch and started moving like fashion. Not because the design was loud, but because the meaning was. People weren't buying fabric. They were buying a signal. They wanted to show they were part of the wave, that they saw it early, that they understood what women's basketball was turning into. Culture writers and lifestyle outlets didn't treat it like a team tee. They treated it like a moment that had crossed into the mainstream. The shirt became a trade chip, real currency. People talked about swapping it for high-ticket items because scarcity changes behavior. Once something gets hard to find, it gains value even to people who don't care about the sport. That's how you know it cleared fandom and entered status territory. And Caitlin Clark's name sat dead center of it all. The conversation around her shifted fast. It wasn't just points and highlights anymore. It was reach, visibility, recognition. Comparisons started landing in pop star territory. The kind of fame where context doesn't matter. You just know the name. She wasn't only pulling in basketball fans. She was pulling in people who never watched a full game, people who didn't even think of themselves as sports fans, and suddenly had a reason to care. That's the difference between a great athlete and a cultural force. One wins games. The other changes who shows up, how money moves, and how the world talks about the entire space. Once the shirt became a symbol, the message was obvious. Some figures outgrow the league around them. And when that happens, the business side has to sprint to catch up. Nike didn't have the option to treat this like a normal sell-through. The numbers forced action. The first run vanished so fast it left executives with two choices: admit the miss or let momentum turn into frustration. So Nike did what it always does when demand proves real: recovery mode. Production calls fired off immediately. New inventory targets set overnight. Factories shifted schedules. Logistics partners got pushed to prioritize restocks. The supply chain suddenly had to move like it was peak season because the moment wasn't waiting. Every piece of the machine scrambled to catch a wave that had already passed it. In a business built on timing, that lag was brutal. The most painful part wasn't that the product sold out. It was how much money evaporated in the gap between gone and restocked. That gap exposed the real mistake. This wasn't just a misread of one athlete's popularity. It was a full misread of the moment around women's basketball itself. Nike planned like the ceiling was low, like demand would stay neat and contained, like the audience would act politely. Instead, the audience moved like people who felt something was finally theirs. They showed up early, they showed up loud, and they refused to be boxed into a niche. The ripple didn't stop with restocks either. Once the rollout expanded into a full collection, the numbers got loud. Hoodies, tees, accessories. They didn't move like support merch. They moved like a flagship line. The more product that hit shelves, the clearer the signal became. The crash wasn't a fluke. It was a preview. This wasn't a one-night frenzy, it was sustained appetite. That's when the industry's tone shifted, not as a feel-good headline, but as a revenue conversation. When one player's line starts carrying real weight inside a company that big, everything changes fast. Forecast models get rewritten, budgets shift, timelines shrink. Anyone who hesitated earlier starts trying to buy back time they already lost. The real shift wasn't logistical, it was psychological. Nike wasn't just restocking a shirt, it was adjusting to a market that had already moved forward without waiting for permission. Women's basketball wasn't asking to be taken seriously anymore. It was proving it at the register, and the rest of the industry didn't laugh this off as an internet glitch. They treated it like a threat assessment. When one women's basketball drop creates that level of demand, every competitor has to ask the same uncomfortable question: what did we underestimate? And how far behind are we? The tone changed immediately. Not the usual nice story energy. It turned into audits. How were forecasts built? Who approved the assumptions? Which decision makers still treated women's basketball like a long-term experiment instead of a present-day engine? Because if Nike could spark that kind of behavior with one clean shirt and a midnight release, then the ceiling everyone had been using was flat out wrong. It's easy to say the answer is Caitlin Clark, and that's true. But it's not the full picture. Clark wasn't just popular, she was a catalyst. She made casual fans move like collectors. She made collectors move like investors. Her audience acted with urgency, and urgency is what turns merch into a market. That's why the rest of the industry reacted like they'd just seen a new blueprint tested in public. The next wave wasn't the shirt, it was what the shirt hinted at. A signature shoe is the real test. That's where you see if demand is deep or shallow, if it's a moment or a relationship. And early signs pointed one way. If a simple logo tee could overload systems, a well-built signature release could become one of the biggest basketball footwear moments in years. Not off hype alone, but off proof. Brands can't fake a fan base that already showed it will show up at scale. And the impact didn't stop with one player. Across the league, everyone felt the shift. Veterans, rising stars, established names, all saw what this meant for leverage. When one launch resets the bar, negotiations change. Agents reference it, executives plan around it, sponsors rethink how they price women's visibility. Media partners notice too. Networks don't pay for potential, they pay for proof. A surge like this becomes a reference point for rights deals, scheduling, promotion, and investment. This wasn't just a shirt story, it was a market signal. This was the kind of moment that permanently changes how women's basketball gets treated from here on out. The shockwave wasn't just about revenue or site traffic, it hit something deeper. It forced a reset on how value is defined. For years, women's basketball lived in a strange contradiction. The talent was obvious, the product was strong, the fan base was loyal, but the investment never matched what was happening on the floor. Brands treated the sport like a side project, safe budgets, careful expectations. Then one launch shattered that comfort zone. That's why the moment felt personal to so many people. This wasn't just fans celebrating one player. It was delayed validation for athletes who'd heard the same message forever. The sport is great, but the market isn't there. Players took smaller deals because that was the system. Teams accepted limited promotion because that was the norm. The entire ecosystem learned how to survive on less, even while culture kept saying it wanted more. Clark's rise flipped the burden of proof. The demand wasn't missing. The exposure was. The distribution was. The belief was. And once visibility finally lined up with momentum, the market responded instantly. Loud enough that it couldn't be brushed off as niche. Loud enough to kill the idea of a temporary spike. It set a precedent that stretched far beyond one league. Decision-makers suddenly had data they couldn't ignore. Athletes walked into negotiations with real leverage instead of hope. But moments this big also pull tension, and the conversation didn't stay purely celebratory. Media voices jumped in, debating what this meant for the wider league. Questions surfaced about who historically gets signature opportunities, and why. Some framed it as proof of deeper inequity, pointing out that visibility and deals haven't always reflected the league's full diversity. Others fired back just as fast. Brands don't move on feelings, they move on measurable demand. And this launch delivered demand at a level that forced action. That didn't erase the bigger conversation about access, promotion, and whose stories get elevated, but it did expose how powerful market proof really is. The logo stopped being just ink on cotton. It turned into a symbol of a shifting sports economy, a reminder that women's basketball wasn't waiting for permission anymore. It was building leverage in public. In the end, the shirt wasn't the story. The story was what it represented. Proof that women's sports can command global attention, bend markets, and force culture to update its assumptions. When elite talent meets real investment and a platform built for scale, the impact doesn't land softly. It lands like a correction, the kind that makes entire industries rerun the numbers. Once the dust settled, the data spoke louder than any debate. This wasn't a modest win or a one-week trend. It was a measurable commercial event with international reach. Websites buckled, secondary markets ignited, mainstream outlets treated the drop like a cultural milestone, not a sports footnote. And the corporate world reacted the only way it ever does to undeniable demand, with urgency, with attention, with a sharp shift in tone. That shift carried straight into decision rooms. Conversations that used to sound speculative turned aggressive. Brands that once asked if women's basketball could move products started asking how fast they could plug into the momentum. They stopped questioning the audience and started competing for access to it. Clark's reported Nike partnership and the runway toward a signature shoe became more than a deal headline. It became a signal, a marker that the market had pushed past the old ceiling. And that ceiling was never natural. It was built from cautious budgets, limited distribution, and a lack of belief dressed up as strategy. Agents saw it immediately. Negotiations changed because the reference point changed. Clark's results weren't dismissed as an outlier. They became evidence, not a standard everyone had to match, but proof of what becomes possible when women's sports stop being treated like charity and start being treated like real business with real upside. That's why this moment lingered long after the launch ended. It didn't just sell out. It rewrote what sponsors, networks, and apparel giants are willing to take seriously. Once an industry gets a real glimpse of demand like that, it doesn't go back to moving slow. And the aftermath exposed something nobody wanted to say out loud. For years, the women's basketball economy was priced like demand was theoretical. Overnight, demand became measurable. It showed up in server logs, conversion rates, regional spikes, and resale behavior, usually reserved for the biggest men's drops. Media rights executives weren't debating highlights anymore. They were studying movement, where interest lived, how fast it spread, and what happened when the buy button went live. That kind of data rewrites negotiations. Broadcast value stops being just about viewers. It becomes about buyers, sharers, search trends, and whether people treat the product like culture instead of background noise. If one player can trigger a commercial surge without a title run or decades of legacy branding, then the foundation used to price future rights suddenly looks outdated. Networks start thinking like retailers, sponsors start thinking like platforms, and the league starts thinking like a global brand with multiple revenue engines, not a single ratings lane. Inside Nike, the internal review was unavoidable, not because demand was a problem, but because being unprepared is a corporate failure. Why was inventory planned like the ceiling was low? Why did the site behave like it expected a normal Tuesday? Why wasn't the launch treated like a top-tier release with stress testing, backups, and real contingency plans? The answer keeps circling back. And it's uncomfortable. This wasn't technical. It was cultural. For years, women's basketball wasn't given the default assumption that it could explode. And when you don't believe something can scale, you don't build for scale. Once the proof hits, you can't unsee it. The market doesn't politely return to the old model. It speeds away from it. Even the gray market noise made the point clearer. Counterfeits and street-level flips don't flood a space unless demand is strong enough to carry risk. Opportunists only show up when the audience is big, hungry, and ready to pay. When a player edition product in fever colors disappears and reappears at a heavy markup, the message is obvious. This isn't being treated like women's basketball merch. It's being treated like an asset. That's why this doesn't feel like the end of a viral drop. It reads like the start of a new pricing era. Women's basketball isn't waiting for invitations anymore. It's forcing doors open through commerce, attention, and digital dominance that can be counted. And the most lasting part of this moment is what it revealed. Fans were ready long before the system was. So when people ask what really happened that night, don't shrink it down to a site crash or a sold-out shirt. What really happened was exposure. The gap between how women's basketball has been treated and what it can actually generate got dragged into the light, with timestamps, receipts, and a global audience watching live. For years, the most dangerous myth in sports business stayed untouched. That demand isn't there, that the audience is too small, that the risk is too high. So brands moved slow, tested quietly, kept expectations low, and treated women's sports like something you support, not something you build around. One midnight drop shattered that whole mindset. Nike didn't invent the wave. The fans did. The players did. Years of excellence did. All Nike really did was place a product in front of a market that had been asking for one. And the response came back so loud it broke the systems meant to measure it. That's not a marketing win. That's a cultural correction. And the league won't be priced the same again. Not by sponsors, not by networks, not by brands that once treated women's basketball like optional inventory. Every negotiation from here forward has a new reference point. Every player with star potential now has proof that the ceiling is higher than they were told. And every executive still calling this a niche has to explain why the numbers keep saying otherwise. This is what the start of an era actually looks like. It doesn't always come with trophies or parades. Sometimes it shows up as a simple product that turns into a global signal. The kind that changes behavior, changes budgets, changes how power gets distributed across a sport. So don't miss the real lesson here. Women's basketball didn't suddenly become valuable. It was always valuable. The world just finally got a clean, undeniable moment where demand couldn't be talked down, spun away, or ignored. If you want more breakdowns like this, the business shifts, the media moves, the real stories shaping the league before headlines catch up. Tap in with Courtside Leaks. Every angle, every backstage move, every moment they don't want you to notice. Stay locked in with the Women's Courtroom, your home for what's really happening behind the WNBA headlines.